Imagine a world where your purchasing manager doesn't just place orders, but has an AI agent who can anticipate needs, negotiate with supplier agents for the best price, and can handle replenishment based on real time production data. This isn't science fiction. This is the future of B2B, and it's called Agentic Commerce. So, what is agentic commerce? You've probably heard the term thrown around quite a bit. You know it's out there in the future, but how do we actually get ready for it today? Agentic commerce is essentially AI agents who conduct business operations, such as buying, selling, or even negotiating on behalf of a business. And all of this is done with minimal human interaction. It probably is a long way from being able to be done without any human interaction. But most experts think that eventually that day will come. Until then, agentic commerce can help really streamline both the purchasing and selling of goods within the B2B distribution industry. But how do we get there? Well, you can't just install AI agents and check the box. We really need to think about this in terms of baby steps. We need to consider that there is likely a multi-year process that's going to have to take place in order to get to this vision of truly agent to agent communication and production. So, what are those baby steps? Before we can run, we really need to learn how to walk. And I was a few months ago a breakout speaker at the AI for Distributors conference. And a lot of distributors were in the room, a lot of vendors, and I got up there to quickly introduce our solution and really why I was there and what I was going to talk about. And I said something that turned some heads and made some people laugh at the same time. I said that AI in distribution is a lot like sex in high school. Everybody's talking about it, very few are doing it, and even fewer are doing it well. You see, I believe that AI in distribution simply doesn't work because we have not laid a good data foundation. And I believe that it's this data foundation that needs to happen first. This is the first baby step toward agentic commerce. And we all want to get there because distribution and manufacturing all run on very thin margins. Distributors, more than anyone, need to learn ways to reduce operational costs and streamline their typical day-to-day operations. The biggest cost in a distributor's budget is their staff. Large customer service teams and bloated outside sales teams could do a lot more with less, and that means adding profitability and long-term sustainable growth. And this is more important than ever because there is a growing talent gap in this market. So in today's episode, I'm not going to dive deep into complex AI models, and I'm not even going to talk about the future, where this could be heading, the visioneering aspect to this concept, which is very exciting. And actually, I hope to dive a little deeper into those topics in future episodes. But for today, we're going to talk about the basics, right? We're going to talk about three foundational pillars that I believe are needed before you even think about an AI agent working in your business. And those three pillars are: number one, structured data; number two, PI-driven systems; and finally, we'll talk about data quality. When these three foundational pillars are laid, now we can start talking about how agents can utilize that data to streamline operations and create a really slick customer experience. All right, pillar number one is structured, machine readable data. If the data is not structured and it's not contained in one single source of truth, those AI agents that I described at the onset are simply not going to be able to access that data, and they're not going to be able to perform the functions they need to be able to execute their tasks. And here's the deal. Somebody is going to do it. It might as well be you. You don't want that purchasing AI agent to go off of your site, off of your brand to somebody else. So the most important thing to start with is structuring data and consolidating that data into a single source of truth. So think about this. The current data problem in the distribution industry is really the concept of so you may have heard this term siloed data, but what does that really mean? It means this, that data is located in buckets that are stored in different rooms. So you may have a bucket of customer data that lives inside your ERP or your CRM system. You may have order data that lives inside of your B2B e-commerce platform, or you may have supplier data that lives in spreadsheets or Word documents. Process data, inventory availability may live somewhere else. Data is an essential part of making this work. And what happens, unfortunately, is that the most important data, that product information, that product catalog data, is oftentimes broken up and lives in different systems. And actually, the most common scenario that I see is that product information data will live in spreadsheets and the ERP system. The ERP system contains the product information that you are actively selling. It represents what your supply chain can fulfill, and it enables you to be able to place those orders both as a manufacturer to your customer, your distributor, or as a distributor placing an order to a manufacturer. Now, the issue with that is that product information that is enriched, that is structured and ready for something like an e-commerce website, oftentimes does not live in the ERP, but most of the time lives in spreadsheets, because these are the documents that you receive as a distributor from your manufacturer partners. And that information rarely gets synced up with the ERP system. There really is no good way of doing this. The ERP system was never designed to be able to manage product catalog content at scale. And so many distributors default to spreadsheets. One of the issues here is that you have the concept of two different types of data. You have unstructured data and you have structured data. Unstructured data is data that lives in things like emails, PDFs, Word documents, spreadsheets. This is utilized by your human sales team, right? So your sales teams can maybe enter into a product information drive, a customer information drive, a supplier information drive, or a company intranet portal, and they can access documents that are important that discuss, supply chain operations, pricing contracts, etc., right? And this is a major issue because that unstructured data is not easily accessed. In fact, it's not accessible at all by external agents. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And the other type of data is your structured data. Now, this is data that you typically will find in your product catalog spreadsheets. It's what you'll find in your database, your ERP system, or even your product information management system, or PIM. Now, every piece of this information lives inside boxes or fields inside of the spreadsheets. And this could be your product ID, your pricing, your color, your size, and it goes on, right? And a lot of these SKUs have, dozens of columns of information that will, that describes what that product is. Now, an AI agent cannot read things like PDFs and Word documents and that sort of thing easily. It's possible, if it had access to those documents, it is possible to create custom code and scripts that will teach that agent how to open up a document, scan it, copy and paste it into a spreadsheet or into a database. That is possible, but it's difficult. Okay. And most purchasing agents are not going to have the ability to do that in the future because if you think about it, they'd have to have scripts for every single type of document and every single type of source. And it's simply not realistic. Now, could be years from now. I don't know. But for now, we need to think about the way an AI agent works. It needs to be told in an explicit way what the product idea is, one, two, three, four, five, what the material is, stainless steel, what the lead time is, 14 days. And this structure is the very language that these AI machines speak. So it has to be structured. We talked about unstructured data. We talked about structured data. This data needs to be obviously structured and it needs to live in one single source of truth so that you can open that data up to an AI agent. So here's some baby steps you can take to get on the right path of structured data. Number one is to inventory your data. It's always a good idea to start with a data audit or a data assessment. Or if you don't have an expert on your team, have an expert who understands the industry, go in, take a look at your data, look at your data practices, and help you determine where the gaps are. What are the steps that you need to take to ensure that your data is clean, consistent, and as complete as possible? That's number one. The other thing is to start small. When we talk about your company data, whether you're a manufacturer or distributor, data encompasses so much more than your product catalog. It includes your customer data, your supply partners, your pricing contracts, and sales data, and it goes on and on and on, right? There's lots of data that are important to your business, and eventually you're going to need to tackle those. But I would say the most important thing to start with is your product catalog data. And the reason is because you simply can't boil the ocean. This is a monumental task, but your product catalog data is your biggest strategic advantage. The products that you offer to your specific customer base and the quality of that product information directly impacts things like sales, order conversion, website performance, and a host of post sales issues like customer inquiries, returns, and exchanges, right? So, this is why it's so important to start with the product catalog content. The other thing to think about is data governance. You need to sit down and really determine what your taxonomy and your schema, that in other words, that's your structure of where you store your data and how you organize that data and how you communicate that data. You need to think about what are my main product categories, subcategories, tertiary categories, etc. How am I going to organize that in a way that makes sense not only to flesh and blood customer, but also to an agent, right? Think about how an agent is going to scan your product data to quickly find what they need. So a taxonomy and a schema is so important as a first step. The next thing you want to consider is making sure that all of your naming conventions are consistent. In other words, is it United States or is it US? Is it each or is it EA? Consistency is so important because it confuses not only your human agents, but your AI agents of the future. All right, let's talk about pillar number two, and that's API driven systems. So, what is an API and why is it so important to the future of B2B e-commerce? Well, you have your beautiful data. Let's say you've taken, you've taken action on that first pillar and you've made a concerted effort to structure and organize your product data, enriching that product data, making it really compelling to your existing customers, right? But it's locked inside of your ERP system or your e-commerce site. So an AI agent, think of this, it can't just break in to your ERP system. Doesn't work like that, right? They can't just log in to your B2B e-commerce account. This is where an API becomes essential for the future of B2B e-commerce. Another way of thinking about this is to think of an API sort of like a waiter in a restaurant. If you're dining in a restaurant, you don't just sit down at the table, look at the menu, and walk into the kitchen and grab what you want and take it back. And it doesn't work like that. You might ruffle some feathers if you try that. But if you have a waiter, that waiter will come to your table. He'll ask you what you want. He'll take down the order. He'll go to the kitchen. He'll bring back the order. And that is very much how an API works. The API is the waiter who will take the data request that you're sending the system that you're trying to access data from, in other words, the kitchen, and that waiter will facilitate the transfer of that data. And some API calls are one way. In other words, the request simply goes to the kitchen and it stays there. And some API calls are two way, and they'll go back and forth, much like a waiter in a typical scenario. I don't know about you, but I've had a one-way call at a restaurant where I placed my order and it didn't come out. But that's not ideal, right? We ideally would want connected systems talking to each other and moving back and forth. That is, I think, an easy definition. If I was explaining this to my fifth grader, that's how I would explain it. But an AI agent, the reason why this is so important is that it needs these waiters, these API calls, in order to check inventory, to get pricing, and to place an order on both sides. Both the purchasing agent as well as the sales agent needs to be able to access these different systems in order to complete the task. So here's some baby steps you can take to make sure that you're utilizing API driven systems. The first thing to do is to take an audit of your tech stack. Think about the technology that you're currently running the business on. Is the business platforms, the software that you're utilizing, is it API friendly? In other words, is there good documentation, APIs available? Is your system based on a cloud interface? In other words, is it hosted out in the cloud where data can readily transfer back and forth? Or is it located on premises, which is a very old school model, which makes it even more difficult for external systems to communicate? Not to say it's impossible, but it requires some additional steps that your dev team is going to have to take. And it puts another burden on your technical team. Okay, so the first step is do your systems offer API first, architecture and capabilities. The next thing to ask is, assuming that many of them don't, am I ready to re-platform in a system in my business to ensure that it is future proof, ensure that it is ready for the future of B2B e-commerce, which is these connected systems and connected agents. And, if not, then I think you're going to have you're going to fall behind rather quickly. And I would suggest looking at some more modern systems. You're going to want a PIM, a product information management system, that's going to API connect to your ERP as well as to your e-commerce system. You're going to want an e-commerce system that connects to your ERP and your PIM, and you're going to want a CRM that connects to your ERP and your e-commerce system and your PIM. And think about it, right? Like, the capabilities of these systems really depend on the ability to integrate these systems into different databases. And this is why it's so important to ensure that you're building the technology stack of your distribution or manufacturing business on API first software. Okay. So you want to think about this in terms of endpoints, right? One of the ways that you can, determine how an integration is built is to think about the data that is required in all of the different tasks and functions inside the business. I need to get pricing. Where do I get that from? I need to get rich content. Where am I grabbing that from? I need to pull customer order history. Where do I get that from? Think about the different endpoints and have your team start working on building this API call functionality inside of your systems. And if you don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that, the good news is that there are many system integrators who specialize in this very thing. They can help you architect all of the different functionality and the connections that you need. And then they can actually build those connections and maintain those connections for you. So that is API first mentality when it comes to your business. And that is the second pillar that you will need to establish if you are going to be agentic commerce ready. All right, the third pillar is data quality and standardization. Now, I got to admit, I'm a little frustrated by certain industry experts and agency leadership who are saying to distributors and manufacturers that the data quality is not as important as some people think it is. Now, I think here's the deal, right? I think if you're working in this industry, if you're working, feet on the ground, right? Boots on the ground in the data business. You have this instinct that an AI, function is simply only going to be as good as the data that powers that function. And your instinct would be correct. The concept of garbage in, garbage out has always applied to computing. It is sort of like the first rule when it comes to completing accurate automated tasks. And it's no different in agentic commerce. If your AI agent is making decisions based on bad data, it simply doesn't work. Now, I've thrown out this statistic a lot of times already, and I'll keep on emphasizing it, that 85%, up to 85%, if not more, in the distribution agency, but we're just talking about across B2B business, up to 85% of all AI projects fail. And the number one reason that those AI projects fail is because of poor data. So the data truly is foundational to making your AI agents work for you. Okay. If you want to move from AI to produce marketing content, writing social posts and blogs, then the thing that you're going to need to really work on is improving the quality and the organization of your data. And of course, as I said before, the same principle applies. You cannot boil the ocean here. You cannot tackle every aspect of your data, but product information catalog data is probably the most important area for you to focus on. So here's an example, right? Like if your inventory data says that you have 100 units of a product, but you actually only have 10, and an agent who is trusting in that data goes out and makes that purchase, and you're only able to deliver 10, well, now you have a massive back order, which is going to create a very unhappy customer. Another example is, let's just say that your product weight is listed in kilograms when it should be listed in pounds. Okay. Now you're going to make a big error in terms of calculating your shipping costs. And it's going to cost you money. Bad data is going to cost you your customer experience, potentially losing customers in the process. And bad data is going to result in errors, which are going to slow down, they're going to slow down your internal teams. So let's just think about this, right? It really goes so much beyond typical naming conventions, right? In data governance formats. It's about things like units of measure. Is it pounds or is it kilograms? It's about dating formats, right? And industry codes like the UNSPC product codes. Using global standards whenever possible is also going to make it easier for your agents to talk to each other. So here's some baby steps that you can take to improve the quality of your data and the standardization of that data. Number one is to designate one person or a small team who is responsible for the quality of specific data. Like, for example, product data. There should be one person or a team of people that own it. They're held accountable to the quality standards that you expect. So many distributors, honestly, even mature, well performing companies, somehow get around shooting themselves in the foot by allowing all kinds of different people to upload product information. Maybe they allow a sales rep to gather information from a supplier and load it to an e-commerce system or to an ERP, and it doesn't go through a rigorous vetting process. It doesn't go through a data management protocol, and this is a recipe for disaster. Okay, this leads to a bad customer experience and errors. And really, like, if you go through the steps first in order to clean the data, you're going to save yourself so much more time. I know it's a heavy lift. I know that data standardization and data governance it seems like it slows you down, but it doesn't. You will go smoother and you will operate faster because of it. You need to implement validation rules, right? Like in your product database, the unit of measure is a drop down menu instead of a free text field. Do you know what I mean by that, right? If you're building out a spreadsheet, and you're utilizing the same information over and over again, you don't want to introduce the opportunity for error by having free text fields. Instead, you want to create options that you can select from a dropdown. That's just a small example, but this concept is what you want to apply across your product catalog content. Determine what those drop-down options are and make them required in order to publish data to your ERP or e-commerce or your inside of your PIM. This forces standardization from the very point of entry, which I highly recommend. 3, like the third baby step you can take is to clean as you go. Okay. Again, you don't have to think in terms of eating the entire elephant. Take one bite at a time. And if you eat the entire elephant, or even if you eat bites of an elephant, that is disgusting. Elephant is not meant to be eaten. I always love when people say it, cracks me up every time. I know, dad jokes. Sorry. But you want to start with a project that's reasonable. Let's just say you want to start with the 1,000 best selling products that you have, or the 10,000 best selling products that you have, or the 10,000 items that are the most profitable and you want to sell more of them. Okay. Think about your priorities and then prioritize this data standardization and data enrichment project accordingly. Okay. So, when you do that, you're going to ensure that the data it is consistent and it is complete. And then you move to the next one and the next one. And eventually you're going to get to the point where you've developed a process that enables you to consistently update catalog content. Items are going to be discontinued. Some items are no longer going to be in stock. Once you have built a clean foundation, how you can get into the really strategic stuff when it comes to selling. And that means optimizing your product selection, bringing on new suppliers, adding additional items, and really focusing on strategic growth. All right, so I'll just wrap up with a quick summary. Before we can get to this incredibly exciting world of AI agents and B2B agentic commerce, we need to do some foundational work. So just as a quick recap, right, we talked about the importance of having structured data, getting that data out of those silos into one source of truth, structuring that data into a database, and then having the APIs available to create open doors. Remember, we talked about APIs being like the waiter that moves between the customer and the kitchen. We want our technology to be connected through those APIs, and that is going to set the groundwork for agentic commerce. And then if we really are serious about making agentic commerce work and avoiding errors and a poor customer experience, we're going to make sure that our data has the highest quality possible. So we're going to work on improving the organization, the structure of our data. We're going to make sure that our product data is as consistent and as complete as humanly possible. And by the way, you can also use some AI tools to make sure that that data is high quality. And finally, we're going to be able to set data governance practices that will ensure that the data that we're working to clean up today stays clean tomorrow and is used to really empower the agentic commerce experience. Now, you may be a couple years away from this, but the best day to start is 10 years ago. But the second best day to start is today. Think about the importance of laying a good foundation so that your team is prepared for purchasing agents who have an AI sidekick. And you want to make sure that you're optimizing for that customer experience. And here's what I'll say in closing. All of this work that we described in terms of laying the foundation for agentic commerce and these three pillars of success, these three baby steps that you can take to make sure that you're ready. It's not just pie in the sky, way out there work, that you're not going to see a return on investment for 5-10 years. I don't want you to think like that. Think about this. The data that you improve, right? The data governance standards that you implement now, right? The API first infrastructure that you create now will create a frictionless buying experience for your customers today, right? This is going to directly impact your search optimization, the amount of traffic that your website pages generate. It's going to improve conversion because the product data will be accurate and complete. Customers will be able to see real-time inventory because of the API calls. Your sales team will be able to operate far more effectively because they have reliable data that they can trust on. They don't need to go back and forth to supplier partners and truly can start serving their customers and being strategic about growing those accounts. Okay. Not to mention all of the post-sales issues like returns and product questions and where's my order, right? This foundational work sets the stage not just for the future, which is agentic commerce. It is coming. It is as sure a thing as email is today, right? This is going to change the game in ways that we really can't even anticipate. But we know for sure that agentic commerce is going to make transacting with supply chain partners and with end buyers easier than ever. So we need to get ready for it. So I'll just say that, we're going to encourage you along the way. We're going to create multiple episodes talking about B2B agentic commerce. And I'm going to move past the foundational stuff and we'll start talking about some of the more strategic, long-term, really cool visionary concepts of how agentic commerce works. And by the way, these aren't actually just concepts. These are tools that are available now. So we'll talk about how you can utilize agents to streamline the ordering process and create a better customer experience starting tomorrow. But that's after you clean up your data. Okay. I'll see you then.